This week on Newsnight, Florida lawmakers pass legislation to aid the Trump administration's immigration policies while rejecting proposals from the governor. Plus, professors from 3 state universities challenge Florida's restrictions on DEI initiatives in higher education. Newsnight starts now.
Hello, I'm Steve Mort. Welcome to Newsnight, where we take an in-depth look at the top stories and issues in Central Florida and how they shape our community. First tonight, this week's clash in Tallahassee over immigration. Governor DeSantis had called a special session to pass legislation aimed at aiding in the Trump administration's deportation efforts, tackling condo fees and shaking up the citizen ballot initiative process. But flexing the legislature's independence, Republican leaders in the House and Senate rejected the governor's proposals in stark terms. They instead called their own special session, passing an alternate $500 million immigration bill to, quote, supplement, not replace the federal government, unquote, on immigration enforcement. All other issues were shunted to the regular session in March.
No way, no how.
In a public rebuke dissecting the governor's bill on immigration, GOP House and Senate leaders described the governor's proposed measures as well-intentioned but bureaucratic.
We do not need to duplicate the functions of U.S. Immigration and Customs and create a mini-me version of ICE. In addition, his proposals would hijack local law enforcement operations, and at one point, he even proposed arresting local law enforcement officers themselves.
In filing their own bill, House Speaker Daniel Perez and other top Republicans hit out at a pressure campaign to get legislators to back the governor.
In the last week, attempts have been made to bully members of this House, including sending out mass emails and text messages with members' personal cell phone numbers on them. Attacks on this body, attacks on all of you, are not acceptable. This House will never be moved by threats.
Republican leaders say their bill, dubbed the Trump Act, puts Florida in lockstep with the new administration, empowering Florida law enforcement to work seamlessly with ICE.
I want to be careful that we don't do anything to undermine President Trump's very good plan. I won't stand for that.
GOP leaders say they, quote, requested and received technical assistance from the White House on the legislation passed by lawmakers. It shifts state-level immigration enforcement authority from the governor to the agriculture commissioner, who will have an expanded role. The bill also beefs up penalties for undocumented immigrants who commit crimes in Florida, allows for rewards for law enforcement officers working with federal immigration authorities, and financial penalties for local governments who stand in the way. It also ends in-state tuition for undocumented students at state universities and colleges in Florida.
What we have in this bill is we've created not the perfect plan, but certainly in this special session with what we've come up with, a very good plan for the state of Florida to follow.
But the legislation rejects several of Governor DeSantis' proposals, including a ban on remittances, no bail for undocumented immigrants who are arrested, and an expansion of transport of unauthorized immigrants to other countries. The governor blasted the changes to his proposals as bizarre. After threatening to veto the bill, he took aim at his critics at a roundtable in Titusville on Wednesday.
Why go to the Ag Commissioner, put him in charge? Why weaken E-Verify and put that in with the Ag Commissioner when we know those guys have never supported E-Verify for employment verification to begin with? And I think the answer is that they want this to be weaker than current law. And they think that if they window dress it one way, that you guys won't hold them accountable for it. But this is not what they campaigned on. This is not what they told their constituents they would do. This does not solve the problem that we have with illegal immigration in this state or in this country.
Democrats, for their part, broadly rejected the Republican efforts to back President Trump's deportation efforts and filed several amendments that failed to garner GOP support.
The motivation by those in charge is to demonize immigrants, is to highlight these tragic stories where someone is killed by an immigrant while ignoring the statistics of where majority of crimes are committed and how they're committed and who commits them. And so it's really important for us to stick to the facts, to not fall victim to sensationalism and misinformation, and to center on the reality before us. The immigration system is federal policy, that it is criminally broken, And as a result, we have a situation in Florida where our biggest industries are reliant on immigrant labor, some documented, some mixed status, and some with outdated documentation or no documentation at all. That is a real problem that we should address. But the notion of demonizing every immigrant, of criminalizing those who are paying taxes in our state while contributing to our economy, it's un-American, it's wrong, it's a distraction from the countless issues in front of us to interact with the cost of living. And that's where we should be focusing our energy on.
Representative Anna Eskamani there. Well, let's bring in our panel now to break it all down. Joining us in the studio this week, Stephen Lemongello, writes about politics for the Orlando Sentinel. Good to see you, Steve.
Happy to be here.
Busy time for you, I'm sure.
Yes, yes.
Stephanie Rodriguez for the first time from WKMG News 6. Thanks for coming in, Stephanie.
Thank you for inviting us.
Good to see you. And favourite of the show, Curtis McLeod, Spectrum News 13. Thanks for being here, Curtis.
Yeah, always a pleasure.
Good to see you today. To note, as of this recording, the governor has threatened to veto the bill passed by the legislature. We tape the show on Thursday morning, so of course things can change by airtime. I just wanted to start with a question to each of you about what stands out to you in this bill. And Steve, I'll start with you.
Yeah, it's just very interesting, as it said, that they would go against DeSantis so heavily, especially after 6 years of basically just following his line, doing what he says. There's some real pushback here, and I think it's just a case of, DeSantis will be around for 2 more years in the governor's mansion, and President Trump will be there for 4 years, and they're just looking to see where their bread is buttered.
Yeah, I want to talk a little bit more about the politics in a moment. What stood out to you, Stephanie?
Well, for me, the students,
Yeah.
the dreamers, them not being able to get in-state tuition if this does become a law here in Florida. We've heard from students that it's almost triple the amount that they're paying now under the law that they would pay per credit. So for me, that was something that definitely stuck out.
Curtis?
I think for me, it was very interesting to see you look at DeSantis wanting to the bill to be more in line with the federal government and Trump's what President Trump wants to see happen. But it was interesting to see the legislature say, hey, no, we want to take this plan, this roadmap, and make it fit to what the state needs.
Yeah.
So it's very interesting.
Yeah. Well, as I said, we'll discuss the politics in a moment, but I want to look at some of the specifics of the bill, which we'll link to on the website so you can read it for yourself, by the way, wcf.org/Newsnight. That's along the bottom of your screen. Democrats unsuccessfully attempted to eliminate a measure that would revoke in-state tuition for immigrant students, as Stephanie just mentioned, at public universities and entered the country illegally. Let's hear from Orlando Democratic Representative Anna Eskamani in committee, followed by Brevard Republican Senator Randy Fine speaking to Newsnight last week.
These are kids that are, in my opinion, so incredibly patriotic, and they love this country so much. And it's not their fault they don't have status. They had to go to a Florida high school in order to qualify for this. It's the only country they know. And for us to basically say that you're not going to be able to afford to go to college, again, it just feels very political and not done in the best interest of our state's economy, let alone the best interest of our kids. And this is a legislature that thinks kids should be kids. And here we are treating a child differently just because of their origin.
Why should an illegal immigrant get a lower price to go to our colleges and universities than an American? I think that's immoral. I mean, look, they should go get in-state tuition in the place that they're from. I think it's not fair to ask a Georgian or a New Yorker or someone from Minnesota to pay 3 to 4 times as someone who's from another country and shouldn't be in this country.
Senator Fine there. We should note Senator Fine easily won his primary in the Florida Congressional District 6 this week. Representative Eskamani says there are nearly 7,000 dreamers in Florida state colleges and universities, including UCF. WCF, of course, is licensed to the University of Central Florida. Steve, let me start with you on this one. What does this mean for people who potentially want to get in-state tuition or who are currently studying that have a waiver at the moment?
Yeah, if you're an undocumented immigrant, those in-state tuition waivers are gone July 1st. So, you could be like, a year away from graduation, and you'd have to sort of scramble to figure out what you're going to do. I just want to say this was something, in-state tuition for waivers for undocumented, this was something that was introduced by Lieutenant Governor then, in the legislature, Jeanette Nunez.
Who's backed away from that now.
Yeah, who's now, she was very in favor of this, 13 years ago. Governor Rick Scott signed it 13 years ago, but she's now, she's gone along with the rest of the Republican Party. She's backed away from it. She put out a statement saying that it served its purpose, which I don't know if, what specifically changed in terms of the past 13 years in terms of students needing education, but that seems to be how it is.
It was a bipartisan effort a decade ago. Stephanie, yourself and your colleagues at News 6 have been getting reaction to this from students. What are you guys hearing?
They say it's a step in the wrong direction. On Tuesday, there was a mock graduation that they held at Hope Community Center, and the students were there in caps and gowns, sharing their stories, talking about the topic. They say that this waiver is not an incentive for immigration, and just to deny them this opportunity to get affordable schooling and things like that is just denying them an education which will get them into the workforce, which will incentivize the economy and things like that. It's just denying them their dream is what they're saying. And they also are pleading with the government to see them as people, as students, not as their immigration status.
And of course, Democrats say that the state has already invested a lot in K through 12 education for these students, so it makes sense to continue to do so when it comes to higher ed. Well, let's discuss the deportations part now. Here's Central Florida State Senator, Democrat Carlos Guillermo Smith on Tuesday night on the Trump administration allowing immigration raids in schools and how that might be carried out in Florida.
We are seeing incidents where even student enrollment is declining in our public schools because parents are afraid to send their kids to school because they believe that immigration enforcement is going to start taking place in those public schools. I share those concerns. Some of our elected leaders share these concerns so much that even in the district I represent in Orlando and Orange County Public Schools has already shared guidance from their legal counsel with administrators about what they are supposed to do and what protocols they're supposed to go through if an ICE agent shows up to the school.
Senator Carlos Guillermo Smith there. Stephanie, let me start with you on this one. And News 6 has been looking at how school districts, not just in Orange County that he referred to there, but across the region, plan to handle the possibility of enforcement. What do we know so far?
News 6 did reach out to all of the districts in our area, and they're all saying similar things, that they do not track undocumented students, but they will comply with the law. We heard Carlos Guillermo Smith there say that Orange County has already sent out guidance. Osceola County has also done that. Volusia County is working on creating a policy, so they're thinking about this and having that possibility already in the works. And we're also hearing from immigration advocates that families are talking to their students, telling them, this is the script to say if you are encountered. Say you won't talk to them without a lawyer, without your parents, or plead the fifth.
The governor stood alongside the sheriffs of Brevard and Polk County. He does that from time to time. Do we know how while he was talking about immigration, do we know how the sheriffs statewide are feeling about being part of this enforcement process?
Yeah, and that's the thing here, Steve, we got to look at with it comes to the Florida Sheriff's Association. Yeah. Most of them are in line with what legislators are doing, what the legislature is doing, and they agree with there needs to be some sort of, rules and laws on the book when it comes to enforcing, immigration. But what they say here is, we want something in place here, but let us do it that works with the state. It goes back to what legislators are saying here. Not everything, things are going on at the federal level, but some of those things don't work for Florida, and we want to work on a workable system, a workable plan, plan of action for the state of Florida.
Bearing in mind, we are recording this on Thursday morning, of course. The governor's expected to veto this, right?
Yeah, he said the pen is ready. Yeah. Which is not surprising given that he's been on a media tour talking about his disdain for it, says it's too weak. He said if it comes to his desk, he will reject it. And if that happens, the legislature could override that veto, but it might be hard given that they need a 2/3 majority and 6 Republican senators voted against it.
You know what I was going to say really quickly about that? I'm just listening to, and there are some talks between Republicans and Democrats on how can we find common ground on all of this. One of the sticking point is, of course, the battle over the in-state tuition for Dreamers, and I think that will probably be the issue that the most where we'll see the division. They won't come together, Republicans and Democrats, on that to override the governor's veto.
And it does seem, though, that the Democrats and Republicans are pretty far apart. Several Republicans, though, Steve, did oppose the bill from leadership in Tallahassee, but most sided with the House Speaker and the Senate President. What do you think, and I guess this goes to what you alluded to before, about what this says about that relationship between the governor and lawmakers, and also the Agriculture Commissioner going forward. I mean, the governor's been pretty tough on Wilton Simpson.
Yeah, in his cabinet, they sit together in those meetings every month. It's like I mentioned before, there was just a lot of hard feelings, both in the last 6 years about, DeSantis basically just, really just, I don't say ruling by fiat, but like what he said the Republicans did. And also a lot of bad feelings about, obviously, DeSantis' challenge of President Trump for the Republican nomination a few years back. Like the last session last year was sort of on the heels of DeSantis dropping out, endorsing Trump. So that was still sort of ongoing. Now we're about a year in. DeSantis has 2 years left. President Trump just got, inaugurated. So I think a lot of Republicans are just, they might have, anything they've, not liked about DeSantis, and now he's done things, even personally over the last 6 years. Now's the time, they feel it's the time they can come out and do it now. They can oppose him. I know there's renewed opposition and talks about looking into DeSantis's, communications staff who've been vitriolic against people for the last 6 years.
Senator Fine has made that a priority.
Yes, Senator Fine, who we just heard from. Now those people are going against fellow Republicans over this bill, and it's just sort of entrenching those bad feelings.
I want to move on and talk about something that took place this week that's important locally on the federal level, Stephanie. This is the Trump administration revoking the extension of temporary protected status, and we've talked about TPS extensively on this program. This is for Venezuelans living in the United States. Florida has the largest number of Venezuelans in the country, most in Central and South Florida. You've reported on this community. How is this community feeling?
Well, they're feeling the pressure. 600,000 people could be deported. They feel persecuted. They don't want to go back to Venezuela because they feel unsafe and unstable under Nicolas Maduro. And even if they wanted to go back, they feel like they would be persecuted there for their political beliefs. I spoke yesterday with the founder of Casa de Venezuela, which is a local immigration advocacy group here. For them, because they were so active in getting TPS for Venezuelans when it was going through the system, and it eventually got it in 2021, it's an even more devastating blow for them. They are in kind of a panic because they don't know what to do, how they can help. They had a big meeting with all of their national chapters, with lawyers, with Congress people, anyone who can help. There were even priests there because they want to figure out the next steps. And they say that their phones have not stopped ringing because people are concerned.
And of course, a lot of Venezuelans flowed to Florida starting in the Hugo Chavez years, correct? Because of the economic and security issues in that country. That doesn't seem to have improved. In fact, it's worsened to a certain degree.
And that's one of the things that the Casa de Venezuela founder tells me. He says, we know that the situation in Venezuela has not improved, and the U.S. government also recognizes that, so they're confused as to why they would remove TPS protections for them, given that nothing has changed in Venezuela and has actually gotten worse.
Well, we'll keep watching, and I'm sure you guys will too, what's happening on the federal level and how that might affect people in our region. You can find a copy of the bill passed in the special session this week on our website, wcf.org/Newsnight. Meanwhile, tell us what you think about it all. We're at WCF TV on Facebook and Instagram. You'll also find us at Newsnight WCF on X. Okay, next tonight, a group of university professors has initiated a federal lawsuit challenging a 2023 Florida law that limits funding for diversity, equity, and inclusion, or DEI, programs at higher education institutions. SB 266 blocks state universities from spending taxpayer money for DEI programs or the promotion of political or social activism, changes hiring practices, and allows tenure to be reviewed at any time. Opponents argue it undermines academic freedom and free speech. The ACLU filed the lawsuit on behalf of the professors who teach at Florida International University, the University of Florida, and Florida State. Jerry Edwards is a staff attorney at the ACLU of Florida.
What we found is that the law is preventing, debates, panel discussions. It's preventing scholars from being able to go to conferences and talking about, say, pro-DEI viewpoints or criticizing the laws that prevent discussion of diversity, equity, and inclusion. Additionally, student groups are being chilled in their ability to discuss these sorts of things. And so really what is happening in terms of the DEI funding restriction is that it's silencing important discussions and important debates that should be happening on university campuses outside of the classroom and things that really characterize the higher education environment, known for free inquiry, free discussion, and debating of controversial ideas.
A reminder once again that WCF is licensed to the University of Central Florida. Steve, let me start with you on this legislation. It basically built on the 2022 Stop Woke Act, right? That was part of the governor's kind of laser focus on education back in those years. Just remind us to start off with what SB 266 actually did.
Sure, yeah, it bans funding for programs or campus activities that advocate for diversity, equity, and inclusion, DEI, and there's a very long description of what DEI is, and it can't be used in anything, in any class. So basically, yeah, it's DEI, following CRT and all the various letters that
critical
DeSantis,
race theory,
has been going against the last few years. Is very sweeping.
I mean, the governor has focused a lot on education, it's fair to say. That's been a sort of a cornerstone of his administration.
Yeah, we see what's happening with the national level with DEI now, but that all really started here in Florida. DeSantis was sort of like the forefront of that.
Yeah, Florida has been sort of something of an incubator of conservative policy for sure. Professors are suing the State University System's Board of Governors and trustees of those 3 universities where the professors work. What are the main arguments that are being presented in that lawsuit there, Curtis?
Well, see, what it comes down to, Steve, it comes down to a matter of free speech and free thinking on these college campuses.
That seems to be what we heard from the ACLU there.
Exactly, and that's the crux of it here, and that's where they are. That's where their argument is kind of structured in that vein. They're saying that, hey, we want to be able to provide thought-provoking communities and also free thinking. And when you have these rules in place and you don't allow money to flow for some of these efforts, then it diminishes that freedom for people to have those conversations, those discussions, and take those course loads that they want, because there are certain lines that you have to straddle. And they also say that the legislation isn't clear. It's not very clear here, and it's kind of ambiguous.
Yeah, and they say that puts that squelches people's ability to tackle issues if they're unsure.
If they're unsure, and it puts the professors in a pretty precarious situation here, because you have to be very careful what you're saying and how you say it. Even, let's say, if a course is approved, but what you say in the course and how you say may offend someone or may rub someone the wrong way. We've seen it happen on the local level, even in the classrooms of different school systems here, whether it be Orange, Osceola.
K through 12.
Yeah, and K through 12. We've seen it happen here, where teachers have to be very careful about what they say, because they could be reported and then essentially lose their job, dismissed, because something is said to make an individual feel out of place or it bothers them.
Of course, the DeSantis administration would push back and say this isn't about squelching free speech, it's about not indoctrinating students, of course. Stephanie, an interesting part of this is the judge in the case. He tossed an earlier lawsuit against the same law in 2023. That was a lack of standing by the plaintiffs. What do those suing this time say is the direct impact, which I guess is what you have to show from this legislation on their work?
Yeah, they say it's viewpoint discrimination. Like Curtis said, because there's no funding for DEI initiatives, they're impeding academic research, which is what many college professors do when they're in university. A lot of them bank their careers on that. They're passionate about that. So that is impeding their livelihood at that point, and stifling student voices, which is what, when we think of colleges and universities, students go there, like you mentioned, free thought, to learn ideas that they would otherwise not be exposed to. So they're really saying that they cannot do their job the way that their job description allows them to because of this.
What have we heard, Steve, from higher education institutions? Has there been much in the way of pushback, or has it pretty much fallen into line?
So far, it's a lot of falling into line. Like FIU, for example, they got rid of a lot of courses that had to do with like gender and LGBTQ and things like that, which is, and a professor was arguing, can you simply just not talk about that stuff anymore? Like, you can't classify people by, race or gender or things like that. Well, how do you talk about certain things? How do you talk about history? How do you talk about a lot of life without doing that? So and it just so we're seeing that there, and also a lot of other institutions around the state.
I mean, certainly attorneys say that when it comes to First Amendment stuff and what you can say, you really do need clarity in the law. Just let me finish with you, Stephanie. Governor DeSantis, as we said, has sort of been a leading voice on this issue on the right. It was a key part of his presidential run. But I wonder where public opinion stands on DEI now, especially as I guess it played or is playing a substantial role in the new Trump administration.
Absolutely. I mean, Fox News did a poll in December before the president was inaugurated, and they found that 1/3 of the voters that they polled were in favor of the president removing DEI from the government. But of course, that means that 2/3 of the people that they polled were not for it. And personally, I've seen just a lot of sentiment on social media of people not kind of understanding what exactly DEI means and what that umbrella term covers. So there's groups that didn't believe that they were under DEI that are now feeling targeted.
Is that what you hear, Curtis?
Yeah, I was going to say that's the big part. A lot of this is you hear DEI and people don't understand exactly what it is, and some people try to relate it to affirmative action. And I think there are some blurred understandings on what it is and who it encompasses. A lot of times you hear, oh, black and white. And people get so confused as to what it means and who it impacts, and that it's so much more broad than what's at play and what's being discussed here.
The distinguishing between affirmative action and DEI is sometimes
or even
missing.
Civil rights, like there was a revocation of a Lyndon Johnson 1965 order about non-discrimination. So it's going way back.
Well, it's a fascinating conversation. I'm sure it's one we'll be having going forward. You can find a copy of the complaint on our website to read for yourself, wcf.org/Newsnight. But that is all the time we have for this week. My thanks to Stephen Lemangelo from the Orlando Sentinel, Stephanie Rodriguez, WKMG News 6, Curtis McLeod, Spectrum News 13. Thanks so much for coming in, guys. Really interesting conversation today. We'll see you next Friday night at 8:30 here on WCF. In the meantime, from all of us here at Newsnight, take care and have a great week.